Today I'm taking you on a tour of Greenwell Farms. Greenwell Farms is located on the Big Island of Hawaii in Kona, and it's a coffee bean farm. And I want to share this with you because I was totally amazed at the process of growing coffee beans and then processing it. Coffee in my house is we just go get a container and scoop it out, put it in the coffee maker, and have our coffee. I never really thought about the process. So I'm excited to share this with you today. We ended up going to a farm of 70 acres, and there was just a little shack there, a little building. And as we were waiting, we got to enjoy watching some birds eat bird feed. I'll share all that. You can see it here. And just the foliage in Hawaii, period. It's just gorgeous. Everywhere you go, there's just beautiful flowers and plants, and it's just gorgeous and very, very comforting. This is the Big Island that I'm talking about. I know the other islands are different, but that was something that really stuck out for me as well. Let's take a walk and take a look at some of the coffee bean plants. When you look at a coffee bean plant, you actually see these clusters of cherries. And at first they're green and they look like grapes. And as they mature, they will turn red. And that is when they're ready to be picked. That's the best time to pick them. A coffee bean plant, typically, as you can see here, they look kind of like a bush. But if you see, walk over here to the fields, you can see that where they're taller trees. This particular farm has several acres here, a lot of different the coffee beans, and some of the trees are at different levels of maturation. When a bean turns red, or when the cherry turns red, that's when it's ready to be picked. And eventually, and we'll go through the process in just a moment, but eventually you'll see the coffee bean that comes out of the cherry. The best way to harvest beans is by hand, and that's to go out and pick just the red berries, and you're going to get your most highest quality of coffee. If every bean that's in that selection is a red cherry and the ready to be picked, it's going to be your highest quality. But of course, that's an intensive labor. So a lot of times they'll do some of their beans that way. The cherries, they'll pick them by hand, and other times they'll just have to process them and take the whole bunch of cherries and shake them out. And the next step is processing those cherries. You want to process them so that you can get that bean out of the middle. Let's take a walk over to the processing area. Processing has to start quickly. Remember, this is fruit and you don't want them to spoil and to rot, so it has to start very quickly. There's two methods. There's the dry method and the wet method. The wet method removes the pulp from the coffee after harvesting, and then the bean is dried with only the parchment skin left on. It goes through a pulping machine where it will just kind of squish them up and crush them and try to get that pulp out of there. This is a picture of an antique machine that was found right here at the farm. Once they pulp it out, they'll shoot it out into tanks and then let them ferment. The dry method is really the oldest method of processing coffee beans, and it's still used, obviously, right here on this farm. The freshly picked cherries are simply spread out on these huge surfaces to dry in the sun, and then you can see the guy here who's raking it and turning it throughout the day. And then they cover them at night and anytime it rains so that they won't get wet. Depending on the weather, this might take several weeks for every batch of coffee, so it's a very intense, labor-intensive process. They want to get the cherries down to 11% moisture content. So it could take a few weeks to get this to happen, depending on what the weather is. Final steps involve hulling. They want to make sure that the cherry is not on the bean, that totally. Even after it's dried, they want to make sure that anything left over from that is gone and it's not there. Sometimes they get polished. Then there's a grading and sorting process, depending on what farm you're at, what quality they're looking for. They sometimes look at them again by hand and go through and make sure any insect-infested beans aren't in there, or anything that isn't up to standard. So anything wrong color, it could be over fermented, it might not be hulled. Any of that will be removed and then sorted. And finally, then it's exported and ready to go. Now, on this farm, they roast their beans, so they have a whole roasting area. It was just basically some huts over there with a big place where the fire goes in a big building. So, which takes a long time. You can smell it in the air where they're roasting them as well. It was fascinating to watch. Really enjoyed it. They had other things on the farm. They were growing pineapples, which I didn't know grew from the ground. They also had peppercorn trees, and we were able to taste the little peppercorns, and some banana trees. I hope you enjoyed the little journey. I have another video down below I found where the video was talking about the different ways to process the beans, and I thought that you might enjoy watching that. He went into a lot more detail, and then there was 3 different ways of processing: the wet process, the dry process, and a honey process. So you might enjoy watching that. It gives you a little bit more information if this is something that you found fascinating.